So the format for this class is this week we're going to look at chapters 1 through 11 of the book of Genesis. And next week we'll look at chapters 12 through 50. And we're going to start off actually with a video. And that video is going to give us a little bit of an overall structure of the book. And then after that, we're going to look at a number of key passages. That's the bulk of our time. We're going to look at key passages in the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. And then we'll tie it all together with some main themes that we can draw out from the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. So some of you, when you see the video, you'll be familiar with these videos. I don't entirely agree with everything that is stated in them. There's a few things in this one, not quite exactly the way I would view it, but these videos are a great resource in the sense that they do an excellent job at giving insight to the overall structure of the different books of the Bible. Kind of a bird's eye view of how the book itself is organized by the author. Obviously, this one being Moses, God speaking through Moses, but it helps in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to start off with that. It's about 7 or 8 minute video. Just sit back and watch.
The book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and its storyline divides into two main parts. There's chapters 1 through 11, which tell the story of God and the whole world. And then there's chapters 12 through 50, which zoom in and tell the story of God and just one man, Abraham, and then his family. And these two parts are connected by a hinge story at the beginning of chapter 12. And this design, it gives us a clue to how to understand the message of the book as a whole and how it introduces the story of the whole Bible. So the book begins with God taking the disorder and the darkness described in the second sentence of the Bible, and God brings out of it order and beauty and goodness. He makes a world where life can flourish. And God makes these creatures called humans, or Adam in Hebrew. He makes them in his image, which has to do with their role and purpose in God's world. So the humans are made to be reflections of God's character out into the world, and they're appointed as God's representatives to rule his world on his behalf, which in context means to harness all of its potential, to care for it, and make it a place where even more life can flourish. God blesses the humans. It's a key word in this book. And he gives them a garden. It's like a place from which they begin starting to build this new world. Now, the key is that the humans have a choice about how they're going to go about building this world. And that's represented by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Up till now, God has provided and defined what is good and what is not good. But now God is giving the humans the dignity and the freedom of a choice. Are they going to trust God's definition of good and evil, or are they going to seize autonomy and define good and evil for themselves? And the stakes are really high. To rebel against God is to embrace death, because you're turning away from the giver of life himself. This is represented by the tree of life. And so in chapter 3, a mysterious figure, a snake, enters into the story. The snake's given no introduction other than it's a creature that God made. And it becomes clear that it's a creature in rebellion against God, and it wants to lead the humans into rebellion and their death. The snake tells a different story about the tree and the choice. It says that seizing the knowledge of good and evil are not going to bring death, that it's actually the way to life and becoming like God themselves. Now, the irony of this is tragic because we know the humans, they're already like God. They were made to reflect God's image. But instead of trusting God, the humans seize autonomy, they take the knowledge of good and evil for themselves, and in an instant, the whole story spirals out of control. The first casualty is human relationships. The man and the woman, they suddenly realize how vulnerable they are. Now, they can't even trust each other. And so they make clothes and they hide their bodies from one another. The second casualty is that intimacy between God and the humans is lost. So they go and run and hide from God, and then when God finds them, they start this game of blame shifting about who rebelled first. Now, right here, the story stops, and there's a series of short poems where God declares to the snake and then to the humans the tragic consequences of their actions. God first tells the snake that despite its apparent victory, it is destined for defeat, to eat dust. God promises that one day a seed or a descendant will come from the woman who's going to deliver a lethal strike to the snake's head, which sounds like great news, but this victory is going to come with a cost because the snake too will deliver a lethal strike to the descendant's heel as it's being crushed. It's a very mysterious promise of this wounded victor. But in the flow of the story so far, you see this is an act of God's grace. The humans, they've just rebelled, and what does God do? He promises to rescue them. But this doesn't erase the consequences of the humans' decision. So God informs them that now every aspect of their life together, at home and out in the field, it's going to be fraught with grief and pain because of the rebellion, all leading to their death. From here, the story then spirals downward. Chapters 3 through 11, they trace the widening ripple effect of the rebellion and of human relationships fracturing at every level. So there's a story about two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain's so jealous of his brother that he wants to murder him. And God warns him not to give in to the temptation, but he does anyway. He murders him in the field. So Cain then goes on to build a city where violence and oppression reign. And this is all epitomized in the story of Lamech. He's the first man in the Bible to have more than one wife. He's accumulating them like property. And then he goes on to sing a short song about how he's more violent and vengeful than Cain ever was. After this, we get an odd story about the sons of God, which could refer to evil angelic beings, or it could refer to ancient kings who claimed that they descended from the gods. And like Lamech, they acquire as many wives as they wanted, and they produce the Nephilim, these great warriors of old. Whichever view is right, the point is that humans are building kingdoms that fill God's world with violence and even more corruption. In response, we're told that God is broken with grief. Humanity is ruining his good world, and they're ruining each other. And so out of a passion to protect the goodness of his world, he washes it clean of humanity's evil with a great flood. But he protects one blameless human, Noah, and his family, and he commissions him as a new Adam. He repeats the divine blessing and commissions him to go out into the world. And so our hopes are really high, but then Noah fails too, and also in a garden. He goes and he plants a vineyard, and he gets drunk out of his mind. And then one of his sons, Ham, does something shameful to his father in the tent. And so here we have our new Adam, naked and ashamed, just like the first, and the downward spiral begins again. It all leads to the foundation of the city of Babylon. The people of ancient Mesopotamia, they come together around this new technology they have, the brick. And they can make cities and towers bigger and faster than anybody's ever done before. And they want to build a new kind of tower that will reach up to the gods, and they will make a great name for themselves. It's an image of human rebellion and arrogance. It's the garden rebellion now writ large. And so God humbles their pride and scatters them. Now, this is a diverse group of stories, but you can see they're all exploring the same basic point. God keeps giving humans the chance to do the right thing with his world, and humans keep ruining it. These stories are making a claim that we live in a good world that we have turned bad, that we've all chosen to define good and evil for ourselves, and so we all contribute to this world of broken relationships, leading to conflict and violence and ultimately death. But there's hope. God promised that one day a descendant would come, the wounded victor who will defeat evil at its source. And so despite humanity's evil, God is determined to bless and rescue his world. And so the big question, of course, is what is God going to do? And the next story, The Hinge, offers the answer. But for now, that's what Genesis 1 through 11 is all about.
All right, so as the video shows, this is the overall structure of the book of Genesis. Chapters 1 through 11, God and the world, and chapters 12 through 50, God and Abraham's family, one family that he chose to greatly use and bless. And then there's that hinge story in between. So just to recap a few things from the video, it mentions at the start that God creates everything out of darkness and disorder that was there. Darkness Yes, I would agree, but I wouldn't say disorder because God had not yet created things in order for those things to be out of order. You need first to for things to be created, for creation to take place, for there to be disorder. Things can't be out of order if there aren't things to be out of order. And so that I would say that there was a darkness, and from it, from just the earth, he brought life and filled it. In fact, a more accurate translation of Genesis 1:2. If you have your Bibles, you can open it up there to Genesis 1. A more accurate translation of verse 2, I believe, is that the earth was without form and void, or formless and empty. And by God creating things, he gave the earth its form and its fullness. That is, by creating the land, by creating the sea, and all of the life that he filled it with. That's what shaped the earth to give it its form and also to give it its contents, and fill the earth so that it's no longer void or empty. And the most important part of that creation, of course, we know, is when God created humans in his image. And part of what that means to be created in God's image is that we were created to reflect his character, to represent his rule on this earth, to have dominion, and thirdly, to replicate his creative nature, to carry on that creative nature in the things that we build and innovate and things like that. So to reflect his character, to represent his rule on the earth, and to replicate his creative nature. So that is, humans are intended to be moral, co-ruling, intelligent beings. And in that way, being in God's image. But obviously it didn't take very long before sin entered the world. And immediately, what does it bring with it? Shame. Right away, sin brings shame. That's why Adam and Eve covered themselves. It says in Genesis that the eyes of both were open, that is, Adam and Eve, the eyes of both were open, and they knew that they were naked. Guilt opens our eyes to the reality of who we are. That's what guilt does. It exposes us. And when it exposes who we are, it immediately brings shame. And so our reaction to shame is what? It's always to cover up, to hide as much as we possibly can. And right away, we can see the damage that sin can do if you don't address it. Right in the next chapter, you can see how far sin can take you if you don't take care of what's in your heart. God told Cain to address his heart, but instead he shirked the warning. And what did he do? He murders his own brother. And when this time kind of going through this, just stopping to think about that for a moment, it's amazing that one generation after a perfect man and a perfect woman are created, someone kills their own family. That's hard to fathom, but it's a lesson to never underestimate unchecked sin in your life and what it might bring you to if you don't heed the warning that the Spirit of God is giving you through conviction. Of course, we know that things get incredibly worse after this. So God sends a flood to punish the whole earth and to wash it clean in a sense. But he saves the only ones that feared him and follow him. And that's a sign of things to come, right? Bringing punishment to the world, but saving the ones that fear him and follow him. Unfortunately, from those that were saved, as they began to repopulate, the sin nature within man hadn't changed. The sin nature was still there, and so as people repopulated the earth, they also chose to disobey God and his command to them to spread out and to fill the earth, and to bring him glory. Instead, they built a tower for their own glory. That's what it says. But from these first 11 chapters, we can see God's dealings with the world as a whole. The creation of the world, the creation of humankind, sin first entering the world, violence filling the earth, a flood to destroy the whole world, the origin of all of earth's languages, and as a result, how the nations of the earth then formed, that come out of that Tower of Babel story. But that's an overview of the overall structure of the first part of Genesis, verses 1 to 11. So as I mentioned kind of in the write-up or promo for this class, we're going to look at the overall structure, the key passages, and the main theme. So now let's get to the key passages. On your handout, hopefully everyone has one. And the first, in Genesis 1:1, we're going to look at that first section of creation, under that heading. In verse 1:1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And there's a couple things to draw from this that I wanted to point to, is that it says, "in the beginning," which means that God created time. That's hard for us to fathom and to grasp, but time itself did not always exist. It had a beginning, and since God created time, it means that God is outside of time. It's not only something that's biblical, but from Einstein's theory of general relativity, it's proven that time and space and matter, they are all created things, and relative. And so time itself is something that had an origin or a starting point, and therefore there was no time before it when God had eternally existed and created time. So God is outside of time. Also, it says that he created the heavens, plural. That's very interesting itself. It's plural. In the biblical times, in Hebrew and in the Greek language, they didn't have specific words that we designate for sky, outer space, God's presence. Those were the three heavens. First heaven, sky; second, space; third, God's very throne. So when it says that God created the heavens, it means that he created all three of those. A lot of times we tend to think, okay, yes, sky, outer space. But even God's throne, the angels, the streets of gold, anything that is not God is created. Only God is eternal. And so even those things, I believe in Genesis 1:1 is when he created all of that as well. Next, verse 26, 1:26, it says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish, the birds, the livestock, the creeping things.'" Right here, one interesting thing is the word "said" in the Hebrew language, it's a masculine singular word. It's a verb for masculine singular. So it's singular. Even though God said, "Let us," that's obviously plural. It's a singular God, but also a plural God. It's a 3-in-1. So it's a very interesting way that the language is used in that part. The Trinity basically said to himself, "Let us make man in our image and in our likeness." And I think this stood out the most to me this time, kind of prepping for this class, that it has both image and likeness. And I honestly can't say for sure I know exactly what that's entirely getting at, but it might be referring to the fact that your child, or you as a child of your parents, your child will both look like you as well as often act like you, for better or worse, right? They grow up under the influence and environment of you, and it rubs off onto them as well. Like father, like son, like mother, like daughter. That's something that we often say. So I think that spiritually, as spirit beings that God created, we are also supposed to have both his image and his likeness. That is, we are to have a moral image of God through our love, justice, to reflect his image in that way, but also to act like God by having a divine purpose or likeness to him in the way that we rule and have dominion over this earth and create things, build things. So I think that might be both looking and acting. And then verse 131, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So just for context, Lucifer was most likely, I believe, created in Genesis 1:1, when it says he created the heavens and the earth, the angelic beings, throne, streets of gold. I believe that that's when Lucifer was created, because remember, angels, anything that's not God, was a part of creation. But Lucifer would not have rebelled and become Satan. Satan means adversary or opponent, enemy, until after all of the creation week. Because here it says at the very end of all creation, God saw everything. So that includes from the heavens and the earth and everything each day. Everything was very good. So I believe that Lucifer must have rebelled, and that fall would have taken place between chapters 2 and 3, when Satan, the serpent, comes to Eve and tempts her. So, but it's just kind of nice to know and to think about and to imagine that here's how things were originally. I mean, can you imagine a world where everything is very good? Man, it's hard for us to even grasp what that would be like. But what's great is that it will be that way again. We will get to experience. We imagine now, and it's not something that we'll only imagine. No, we will also get to experience it one day. That's pretty cool. All right, so going to the next section, trees and marriage. Starting with key passage here in chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. It says, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat." So out of the entire garden, only one tree was prohibited, yet they were still tempted. I mean, that's amazing to think about, that it's just the restriction of one thing that we want to know why or what's about that I can't, have. But Satan was telling Eve that she would be, and they would be like God, knowing good and evil. And that's the thing about Satan's temptations, is that there's always elements of truth to it that suck you in and trick you. Because yes, they didn't have a knowledge of evil or a distinction between good and evil at the start. It was just all good. That's all they knew. The concept of evil was not even in their minds. And so Satan's trickery is to tell something that's partly true, that yes, you will have a knowledge of good and evil by taking this, but that doesn't mean that it's good for you to have. So they would become like God in that way, but some knowledge isn't good for us, right? We want to know everything, but God's a lot of times says, no, I'm not going to let you know about that or inform you of that. You just need to trust me. There's a lot of things that are like that we just need to trust God. And some knowledge corrupts us. Some knowledge removes our innocence. We do the same. I can remember extremely clearly this as a father. and I'm sure a lot of you as well, when your children are very small and they're starting to grow up, and there's so much about the world and the realities of the world that you don't even want to bring up or expose them to or even mention, just death or that not everybody follows Jesus or really evil stuff that take place in this world, and you have to slowly, because you want to maintain their innocence for as long as possible. And that, especially for children before the right time, them being exposed to certain things, it corrupts. It can very much corrupt them and do damage. And so we have to trust God for a lot of this. And unfortunately, Adam and Eve, they went on their own and took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. 2:24 of Genesis says, "A man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." So right away at the start, God institutes marriage and makes an unmistakable definition of what, in his sight, which is the only view that's important, marriage is. A man, his wife. Singular, male, female. It's very clear. And I personally believe that this passage is also teaching us that this is when marriage occurs in God's sight, when the two, as it says, the two becoming one flesh. So not the ceremony, not the pronouncement of husband and wife, not the signing of the marriage certificate. Those are all the human standards of when we reckon a marriage has taken place, which is perfectly fine. But in God's sight, I believe it's the act of the two becoming one, as he defines it here in Genesis. And I believe also that this is why Jesus teaches in the New Testament, in Matthew 19, in Mark 10, and in Luke 16, that sexual immorality is the only grounds for divorce. And that if you get divorced for different reasons and marry again, you are the one committing adultery. That's what Jesus says in all three of those passages. And I think it's because intimacy is what makes you one. It's what creates that bond. And so by having that act and intimate interaction with someone else, it breaks the bond with the one you're with and forms it with someone else. And so that's the way God views it. Thankfully, God is always and ever forgiving, always and ever healing. And you can look at so many instances in Scripture where incredibly used people of God fell into this. You look at Abraham, Jacob, David, Solomon, all guilty of this, and yet God still greatly used them. But here's where I believe is the definition of marriage, both in who it involves and in God's sight how it takes place. Next section of chapters 3 and 4, the curse. Verse 6 says, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband." Do you see those three aspects of what the temptation was for her? Good for food, delight to the eyes, and desirable to make one wise. That's very interesting that these are the three temptations of the fall, because these are the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life that it talks about in 1 John 2:16. That is, it's the temptations for pleasure, possessions, and pride. Pleasure, possessions, and pride. Or to put it another way, it's a temptation to disobey God in order to feel good, to have good, or to look good. Those three things. But that's basically the temptations we also face today. Those three: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. To look good, to feel good, to have good. And it's not that those three things are bad. It's choosing to disobey God in order to pursue those things for ourselves. 3:15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Very interesting passage, key passage. It says in this verse, it says your seed and her seed. There's only been one time in all of history that the seed has come from a woman without the help of a man. Because we know the seed comes from the man in the process. And that one occurrence was the woman Mary, right? And that one offspring was Jesus. So this is very clearly a prophecy about Jesus, the seed of the woman in the future. Notice also that it says that as one of these attacks happens, so does the other. While the serpent is bruising Jesus' heel at that same moment, kind of like I said in the video, he is also bruising or crushing his head. And what's that one event where both took place? The cross. That's when Satan was bruising his heel. He was being crucified. He's being put to death. But Jesus at the same time was crushing death forever. For those who would put their faith in him, he was bringing victory out of it. And so it's an incredible description of what would take place in the future when Jesus defeats Satan. Verses 16 and 17, to the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbirth. And to Adam he said, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain and by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. We know curses always bring consequences, right? There's always a consequence for sin. It always follows sin. Always consequences to our disobedience. For woman, here, one is that there is now pain in childbirth. Which means if the woman didn't sin, then she would have had no pain in childbirth. Not during pregnancy, labor, delivery, I imagine postpartum. I mean, how nice would that be? And for man, if he didn't sin, he would have no pain in working for his food. All his work under the sun would be fun, it would be smooth, it would be easy, like it was in the garden before the fall. It's just that sin, when it entered the world, it cursed those things. Those things were already a part of God's design and his intent. Childbirth and work were already going to be a part, and especially the work was already taking place in the garden. God said to what to Adam and Eve? Be fruitful and multiply. So he always designed for them for childbirth, to have children, to fill the earth. And obviously God placed them in the garden. They were already working it. And so those things are good. They're very fulfilling. They bring life. Very good things. It's just that with sin, it brought a curse to go along with those things. Made them more difficult. And then chapter 4, verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. And I mentioned this earlier. It's just incredible. The effects of sin and how quickly they escalated. I mean, the very children of Adam and Eve, this takes place. So again, never underestimate what sin even you or I might commit if we don't address the issue first in our heart, where it could lead us. God warned Cain very clearly. He said, sin is crouching at the door. And he told him to deal with it. He didn't listen. And of course, he went on to murder his own brother. All right, so moving on to the next section of the flood. This is chapters 6 through 9 of Genesis. And you can see here are some of the major sections in Genesis. You got creation, you got the trees of marriage, the curse, now the flood. And in chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." Think about that phrase. Every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. How wicked people had become on the earth. I mean, things are bad today, but imagine how much worse it could be if that described all of humankind on the earth. And it will get much worse one day, just like it says in 2 Peter 3, that God will again destroy the whole earth another time. Not with water. This time it talks about with fire. But I think it's also very telling from that statement just how immense God's patience is, to allow it to get all the way to that point where every intention of the thoughts of people's hearts was only evil continuing. Think about an infinitely holy God allowing things to get to that point before he brings, it just shows the patience and the love that God has. Whatever offends us offends a holy, infinitely holy God far more. And this shows that he is very, very patient with us as his people. But again, we know that it will get that bad again, and then he will bring the judgments that we read about in the book of Revelation. Verses 13 to 15, all right, 6 of chapter 6, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh with the earth," along with the earth, or together with the earth. "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, its height, 30 cubits. So he's going to make an end to all people, to all flesh, and to the earth itself. He's not only going to destroy all people, but he's also going to destroy the earth. And I think there's something in there that we often just kind of read over and miss, is that when God brought the flood, he, I believe, completely reshaped the earth. There was so much that took place. We did a class a few years back. It was called The Flood Before and After, God Reshaping the Earth. And I recommend it if you are interested to see the possibility of exactly what took place during the flood and how all the current land formations that we have today came out of the cause and effect of what took place during the flood. So it wasn't just that he brought an end to the life at that time. He also changed and destroyed that original and brought from it a new earth, in a sense, to a large degree, as well as a new line of people from Noah and his family. But notice also that God gives to Noah exact instructions on how to be saved. Right? Exact. Down to the dimension of how much, cubits for this and that and that. But isn't that also true for us? That he gives us exact instructions on how to be saved. Through Christ's work on the cross, through faith in him and following him, and that's the only way. And I think there's a parallel there of God saying, here is how you can be saved. When he says, this is how you can make it. Chapter 7, verse 19, "And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered." And I think this should put to rest, because it's so clear that the flood was global. It was not a local flood. There were lots of attempts to say, well, maybe it just meant, this Middle East region where God brought. How do you have a local flood when it says all the high mountains under the whole heaven, under the whole sky, were completely covered. It's impossible to have a local flood, and because obviously water seeks its own level. We know that, and so it becomes very clear. Why even build an ark, right? I mean, Noah and his family could have just moved to a different area. God could have sent them out, just like he sent, Lot and his family out of Sodom and Gomorrah, but it had to be a globe. Or why bring animals, two of every kind? There were certainly animals outside that local area. They could repopulate. So it is most definitely, and it's very important to believe that, because it has a lot of effects to what else you believe and about the future and judgment. So it's important. 9, chapter 1 and 6, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then it goes on, verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. God wants the earth to be refilled with humans and for them to spread out over all of it again and enjoy all of it and make use of all of it and have dominion over all of it. That was God's design. That's obviously the command that the Tower of Babel people would be breaking. But here he's saying, be fruitful again, have children, populate, and fill the earth. Spread out and fill the earth. That's his command. And then also, if you notice, if you look at verse 6, it says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his image. To me, it's clearly stated here that it is God's will that the death penalty exist for murderers. It's right here in Scripture. And it says why. Because when you murder someone, you are destroying the image of God. And therefore, as God's image bearers or image representers, to represent him, we are to punish that murder with death. So it's very exclusive to who it's talking about in this passage, to those who take life, and therefore to preserve the dignity, the honor of the image of God. That's what God instructs in this passage. The image of God is what is at stake. Verses 13 to 15, I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When we think of a rainbow, we think of it as a reminder to us, right? And it is. It is a reminder to us. But it's just interesting, the wording in this passage, because it says that when there's a rainbow, God remembers his covenant. Not that God needs reminders. He doesn't forget anything. But it's basically God saying, see, I'm keeping my promise. I haven't forgotten. Which is interesting because when do we see the bow? It's after the rain. And so it's basically saying, I told you, I made a promise. I'm keeping it. I remember my covenant. And it reminds us as well. But I think it also is a reminder to us of something else. It does to me. When I look at and see a rainbow, it not only reminds me of, yes, God made a promise. He's keeping it. He's not going to destroy the whole earth with a flood. But it also reminds me that a future judgment is also coming on the entire earth. This time, of course, again, it's not with water, but it's going to be with the seals and the bowls and the trumpets of Revelation, and then eventually with fire. But it tells me, okay, God is going to deal with all the wickedness and the evil and set things right. It's a sign of what is to come. And then finally, if we look at this last section, the Tower of Babel, 11 verse 4 says, the people at Babel, or let me read it, sorry. 11 verse 4, then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. So these people at Babel, they gave two reasons of why they wanted to build a tower that reached up into the heavens. And again, remember what heavens means. It's referring to, the sky, space, God's throne. So to me, I think they're just kind of using big language, and it's saying we're gonna build a tower that goes up into the sky. It's gonna go above the clouds. It's very ambitious of them. And first, they said, here are the two reasons why they give, of why they wanted to build this tower. Number one, let us make a name for ourselves. What were they doing? They were seeking their own glory, not God's. They wanted to make their name great instead of being focused on the greatness of God's name and making his name great. And secondly, they say, lest we be dispersed. So they were refusing to spread out. They were refusing to fill the earth like God had commanded. Multiply, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. They were refusing to do that. They were in direct rebellion. And that's why God acted. And here it tells us how he acted. 11 verses 7 and 8. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth. So because of their pride, making their own name great, their disobedience, not scattering and filling the earth, God introduced a bunch of new languages, which then forced them to spread out, because now they can't even understand each other. They can't even talk to each other. And I believe that people then spread out, obviously, according to language. Those who spoke the same language, here, let's get together, let's move over here. These people, they went this direction, and it tells us basically that's how, number one, all the language of the earth came into existence. Number two, that's where nations were formed. The rest of Genesis 11, it talks about the forming of nations, and it's basically this. That's why you have these people who speak this language over in this part of the world. These people who speak this, it was a natural way that people spread out and filled the earth according to language. And we know from prophecy in Scripture that one day it will all be reversed back to where we can all communicate and speak one similar language, one pure language. It talks about in Zephaniah. I think it's chapter 3, verse 9. And we even got a taste of that, a little taste of what that's like as soon as the church was born, right? At Pentecost. And suddenly people can understand each other through when the Holy Spirit came down and gave the apostles the gift of tongues. And so I believe one day, again, we will all be able to communicate with each other, speak the same language. So it's a sign of things to come in that sense. So those are the key passages, I believe, of the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis. And so here we have, these are the three things I wanted to share with you. Number one, the overall structure. If you want to watch these, you just put in the book on YouTube, Bible Project. So Genesis Bible Project, Exodus Bible Project, and you can get this for any book of the Bible. But here's your overall structure: God in the world, God in Abraham's family. Here are your main themes that we can draw out from all that we've looked at today. Number one, we live in a good world made bad by humans. But it was created good. It was created very good. Number two, our sin brings pain, destruction. Pain through the curse, destruction. You can see the flood, chaos at Babel. But that's what sin brings. And number three, God promises to send a victor over all evil. We see that in Genesis 3 with the prophecy of the seed from the woman. So those are the main themes. I think that they're on. Did I put them on the back? Yeah, okay, good. And then you have, of course, the key passages. So that's it. Yeah, that's the first section. We'll meet again next week to look at a little bigger section, chapters 12 through 50. Yeah.